Steve Rogers sits on the edge of his bed, the morning light soft on his weathered face. Rosa hands him a mug with a familiar emblem, urging him to relax. He takes a sip, her kiss grounding him as the room hums with the weight of his past. Steve paces his dim apartment, coffee in hand, stopping by a stack of memories. His eyes linger on a campaign poster of his younger, hopeful self. Surrounded by the past, he mutters, heavy with resolve. Forgetting isn't an option. In the neon-lit streets, Steve moves unnoticed, a relic amid holograms of modern heroes. A young woman hesitates, breaking the flow of the crowd. "Are you Captain America?" she asks, her voice trembling. Steve nods, his face lined with history. Her excitement is palpable, but he quickly realizes she hopes for a selfie. Their conversation halts as Luke Cage joins, coffee in hand, teasing Steve about Rosa beating him to it. "Matt's waiting," Luke says as they head to the park. There, Daredevil greets Steve with a wry H-Day, referencing the weight of the past. Matt vents about oppressive surveillance laws and curfews that echo Hydra's control. Steve, ever steadfast, reassures him with a quiet but meaningful, "You're a good man." Steve laments his failed political efforts, feeling the public no longer wants change, while Luke counters with his own quiet acts of service, urging Steve to recognize his symbolic power. Luke's frustration with the surveillance state grows, expressing his exhaustion with being constantly watched and controlled. Steve cooks dinner, brushing off Rosa's offer to help, as their conversation touches on his earlier meeting with Luke and Matt. Their criticism weighs on him, but Rosa reminds him of all the good he's done and continues to do. She quips sarcastically about him needing to don the A in tights again, emphasizing that he doesn't need to be Captain America to make a difference. A news report drones in the background. Steve's eyes lock on the TV as a documentary promo paints the Red Skull, Johann Schmidt, as a hidden hero who opposed Hitler. The claim feels like a slap, twisting history beyond recognition. "This is... how?" he mutters, anger rising. Rosa, sensing his frustration, tries to calm him. "They're just stirring up controversy," she says. But Steve slams his glass down, seething at the audacity. Frustrated, Steve mutters, "Nobody cares about the truth anymore." His voice heavy with anger. He retreats to the bedroom, weighed down by history. Amid packed boxes and scattered memories, he sits on the bed, pulling out a photo of his old teammates. Thor, Iron Man, and others. His reflection in the glass looks back, weary and lined. "Nobody cares," he whispers, his eyes lingering on Tony Stark's smirking face, frozen in time. A flashback reveals the Avengers addressing a press event. Stark modestly credits the FBI for stopping a Hydra nuclear threat, though Captain America emphasizes the pivotal role of Stark technology. The scene shifts to Stark Tower, where James Rhodes, etched with glowing tech tattoos, lounges. Jarvis quips about Rhodes avoiding the Iron Man mantle, sparking Rhodes' weary response for coffee. Jarvis sharply reminds him, "I'm not your butler. That was my brother." The moment balances humor and the weight of unfulfilled expectations. Rhodes sips his coffee as Kyle critiques him, noting Eddie's role as more than a butler and hinting at Rhodes' guilt. The disarrayed room reflects Rhodes' frustration as Kyle pushes him to create new soldier armor for rising tensions on the Hungarian border. Kyle, unimpressed by Rhodes' efforts, suggests a visit to the raft. The subtle power dynamic shows Kyle's authority and Rhodes' reluctance. Breaking the tension, Kyle activates a hologram of Steve Rogers, hinting at an FBI request involving an old friend. The revelation leaves Rhodes in uneasy silence. Steve adjusts his tie, calm amid the studio buzz, his composure contrasting with the host's enthusiasm. Jimmy enters, flashy and confident, calling him Uncle Steve. Steve's measured response underscores the generational divide. As the broadcast countdown begins, the tension between tradition and modernity is unmistakable. The broadcast introduces Steve Rogers and James Stark, diving into the controversial Red Skull docuseries. Steve firmly opposes its revisionist take, honoring the sacrifices of those who fought against the Red Skull. James dismisses Steve's perspective as outdated, arguing the world has moved beyond simplistic notions of heroes and villains. Tension peaks when James ties Hero Day's tragedy to Steve's ideals, leaving the conflict simmering as their differing views on heroism clash. The screen fills with destruction, fires, and rubble, and James Stark declares Hero Day as the superhero community's downfall. He blames Bruce Banner for devastation and death, then implicates Ultron and Hank Pym, challenging the Avengers' legacy. Steve's expression tightens as Stark questions his credibility, hinting that such failures undermine his defense of the past. The tension builds, the narrative slipping from Steve's control. Steve's voice cuts through the studio, challenging Jimmy's rhetoric and accusing him of tarnishing fallen heroes' legacies. Frustrated, he refuses to let his pain be exploited for ratings and storms off. Regret follows as Steve mutters, "I shouldn't have let him get to me." Jimmy's jab still echoing, reflecting in solitude. He sees traces of Tony and Jan's defiance in Jimmy, but contrasts it with his own harsh youth spent in trenches, surrounded by loss. Memories of battle engulf Steve, fire raging, buildings collapsing, and a younger Captain America in the chaos. "Damn it, Tony," he whispers, sorrow and anger in his trembling voice. Flames blur his vision as his body, once unyielding, now falters. Clutching his chest, he mutters, "Slow down, old man." But the pain grips tighter. A voice from the past echoes, "We're en route, Tony." The memory surges, blurring reality as Steve drowns in the weight of his past. The Quinjet carried Captain America and the others toward a city in chaos. Ahead of them, Tony Stark flew solo, his voice steady through the comms. Secret identities are blown, families being targeted, ambushes everywhere. Villains enhanced. Steve's expression hardened. Who's behind it? Still figuring that out. We'll need to capture one to study. The jet landed in the fiery wreckage. Steve disembarked first, shield in hand, surveying the destruction. Flames danced across Steve's shield as he pressed forward, his focus unshaken, stepping deeper into the devastation. Amid the ruins, Steve Rogers approached the battered figure of Spider-Man, half buried under debris. A faint, trembling voice called out, "Hey, Cap." Peter's mask was torn, revealing a bloodied face, his breath labored but determined. "Son, save your breath," Steve urged, kneeling beside him. "Help is on the way." But Peter pressed on, struggling to speak. "You'll keep her safe? My aunt, May Parker, my identity." His voice cracked, desperation shining through. "You'll be fine, son. You'll be..." Steve's words faltered as Peter exhaled his last, his body stilling. Steve closed his eyes, gripping Peter's hand one final time. He stood, shoulders heavy with grief, as Natasha and She-Hulk joined him. "You're Spider-Man, son. You're the best of us." Steve shakes off the lingering flashback, steadying himself as a curfew enforcer barks a warning. He nods tersely, masking his weariness. Nearby, a voice calls out, "One more, man, just one more." The kids skate and film tricks, their laughter breaking the night's silence. Curfew enforcers approach, their presence turning the light-hearted scene tense. One soldier seizes the camera, smashing it with a sharp crack, dismissing their protests. "Curfew isn't for another 10 minutes, one boy argues, but the enforcer sneers, "Not according to my watch." The threat lingers as the enforcers loom over the group. The curfew enforcer taunts the kids, tightening his grip as Steve steps in, calm but firm. "Officers, I think they've learned their lesson," he says. "Move along, old man." The enforcer sneers, swinging his baton. Steve counters with practiced precision, disarming him swiftly. Though slower and weaker than before, Steve's resolve holds firm. "You fought in wars," he reminds himself, ready as the other enforcers close in. Steve, battered but unyielding, shouts, "Run, damn it!" to the kids. His voice is hoarse but commanding, urging them to escape while he holds the enforcers' attention. Despite his efforts, his body betrays him. His bad knee gives out, and he collapses under the assault. Blood streaks his face, his breath shallow as he struggles to rise. The kids obey his order, scattering into the night. Steve remains behind, enduring the beating with grit and defiance. Hooded figures emerge, swiftly taking down the enforcers with precision. Calls for backup are silenced as batons clash and enforcers fall. James arrives unannounced at the raft, brushing off Maxwell's protests about security protocols, citing pressure from the president. Maxwell warns of the risks, particularly the danger of the public finding out sensitive information. James picks up on the underlying threats, firmly reminding Maxwell of the advancements he's provided, asserting his authority with calm precision. James strides through the flashing red halls, ignoring warnings as the final door hisses open. Inside, Tony Stark floats in a containment tank, suspended in cold blue light, wired into machinery that preserves him unnaturally. James approaches, sliding on the Iron Man helmet. "Hey, Dad," he murmurs. The vehicle rumbles quietly as Steve regains consciousness, his surroundings dim and unfamiliar. Luke sits across from him, composed yet intense. Steve's confusion is met with firm resolve. Luke's presence and the hooded figures flanking them leave no doubt. They're in the midst of something bigger, and Luke is counting on him to understand the stakes. Luke delivers the devastating news. Matt is dead. Steve reels, disbelief etched on his battered face as he recalls their recent meeting, but Luke insists it's worse than it seems. Beneath the surface, the world is unraveling. He explains the growing control of powerful organizations, with freedom of speech stifled and truth overshadowed. Steve struggles to process, clinging to the idea that he'd know if things were this dire. Luke counters, outlining their efforts to spread the truth, but they need a symbol, someone the people will rally behind. Steve resists, his self-doubt surfacing, recalling his failure to protect even the kids earlier. But Luke looks him in the eye, offering a simple response. "You could." Luke introduces Steve to a hidden lab where Carrie explains their failed attempts to replicate the super soldier serum, which has proven fatal for most. Luke emphasizes that Steve is more than just a soldier. He's Captain America, a symbol the world needs. Gesturing to their group, the Defenders, Luke frames himself as a guide, leaving Steve to grapple with the heavy decision ahead. Luke introduces Steve to Amy, a former S.H.I.E.L.D. operative leading their intelligence efforts. Amy hands Steve documents containing evidence of systemic abuses, photos and reports detailing the plight of Americans targeted and silenced. In a private moment, he records a heartfelt message to Rosa, apologizing for his absence and acknowledging his struggles, while reaffirming his commitment to stand for what's right, even amidst chaos. Steve undergoes a revitalizing transformation over several days, enduring medical procedures and training. Regaining strength, he reflects on his mission, knowing he can't do it alone. Stepping forward, he resolves to inspire others, his determination solidified as he moves into the fight ahead. Steve stands in front of his old suit of armor, the looming figure of Captain America behind him. With determination, he declares, "I'm going to assemble the Avengers."